honored to introduce our speaker tonight that's going to help us delve even deeper into that mystery. Helen Alvare is an associate professor of law at George Mason University. I'm guessing they're from George Mason University. She worked at the Office of General Counsel for the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, where she drafted amicus briefs in leading U.S. Supreme Court cases concerning abortion, euthanasia, and the Establishment Clause. For the next 10 years, she worked with the Secretariat for Pro-Life Activities at the NCCB, now the USCCB. There she lobbied and testified before federal congressional committees, addressed university audiences, and appeared on hundreds of television and radio programs on behalf of the U.S. Catholic bishops. In other words, this person is a very big deal. Seriously. Her scholarship regularly treats current controversies about marriage, parenting, and the new reproductive technologies. Currently, she's spearheading the campaign for religious freedom against the HHS mandate through the, quote, Women Speak For Themselves campaign. And I'd add to all that, she's an incredibly engaging and dynamic presenter. Give her a warm welcome to Helen Alvare.
Good evening. My gosh. I always told everybody I like to talk to a lot of people, but they took me way too seriously. This is a lot of people. Thank you for being here. It is very exciting to have the chance to be with the future of the church on this Friday night of a new year. And my gratitude to you, to the organizers, there must be thousands of organizers, to get the chance to think with you tonight about living our Christian life in the world as we find it today. So you probably spotted this already, but this is a gigantic topic to take on in, about 30 minutes, living the Christian life in the world as it is. So I thought I would zero in on something a little smaller, a theme that's never far from my mind, and it's actually never far from the headlines. It's also in the words and the actions every day of our beloved Pope Francis. The matter of orienting our lives, our love, to serving God by loving and serving the other, fellow human beings. Wherever we look, we see a paradox, right? Everyone wants to love and be loved by other people. But at the same time, human life, especially the most vulnerable, is ignored, unwelcome, or even destroyed. War and terrorism numb us to body counts. Children wait in foster care. Men and women are in the street homeless with no apparent family or friends to take care of them. Abortion clinics are operating under legal protection. The elderly and the disabled are go wanting for company. But at the same time, the dying report that it's the love of family and friends, not things, that brought joy to their lives. The vast majority of teenagers tell surveyors all the time that they aspire to committed love in a lifelong marriage and parenting for the most part. Brilliant schemes for charitable care for immigrants and the poor are hatched monthly. Parents are welcoming children every day who'll need their love and care for the rest of their lives. Soldiers risk their lives for comrades and strangers. Sisters, brothers, deacons, priests offer their lives to lead us to Jesus Christ. In short, we human beings have a blessed and tormented relationship with other people. But as Christians, we are called unambiguously to live alongside others in radical equality, to share that little space that I think we sometimes think we're sharing with no one else, we're occupying alone at the very center of the universe, at the center of attention, right? Or to quote the inimitable words of Father Brown in the Chesterton Father Brown mysteries, "You matter, I matter. It's the hardest thing in theology to believe." And how true that is. So let me unpack that for you a bit. Our God is excruciatingly clear, sometimes painfully, about the fact that people merit priority, other people. Starting with the fact that he bothered creating us at all when he's all in all. He created the billions of us living on the planet and the billions that went before and those that are going to come after. the passengers that went down on Air Asia 8501, their grieving families, the residents of the tiniest outlying civilizations you can imagine, and the ones living in New York City, the sick newborn who lives a few hours, and my best friend's elderly aunt who dropped dead at 105 last week with a smile on her face and a kind word for everybody before she died. There is also the fact that Jesus became human. He came to us directly, rather than remain in some faraway divine realm where we could only theorize about him or contemplate him at some distance. No, he came and then he walked up to people. In fact, for years he walked around, issuing personal invitations to talk to him, to share a meal with him, to say prayers together. He gave people a look. As the marvelous theologian Luigi Giussani said, he took them seriously. He demonstrated passion for the individual. And then Jesus allowed himself to be moved by our human sorrows. He weeps over Lazarus. He comes into a town and sees a funeral procession where a widow is burying her only son, and he raises him from the dead. Look too at Jesus' parable stressing God's love for the likes of us at our selfish worst, the prodigal son. And look also at the Good Samaritan parable, where I don't think God could be any more clear about what we owe to other human beings in need, everyone we meet. And what about Jesus' way of summarizing all the law and the prophets with the twofold commandment? Love God with all your heart and mind and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. And then, of course, there's the huge, inescapable fact that the God-man, who didn't have to do any of this, suffered and died for us. What are we to do with this giant, inescapable theme of the Christian life? A theme our Pope Francis has been especially keen to highlight in his words and deeds these past couple years. I'm going to treat this in two parts. First, respecting family life, the first place we come to learn and experience putting other people first. And second, our vocation outside the family, to the world at large. Respecting the family. Undoubtedly, you've heard that lovely language that family is the school of love, family is the domestic church. These are beautiful words, but I think we've heard them so often that they wash over us maybe without leaving any visible marks. But how about this? Family are the people given to you and you to them, so that none of you fall into that trap so memorably captured by Linus in the Snoopy cartoons when he said, "I love humanity, it's people I hate." These are the people you need to wait patiently behind for your turn in the bathroom. The people who need a ride when your car stalls out and you're sleeping. The people who need you to love them through addiction, who need your patience when they lose their powers of reason. And of course, I could go on. These are the people offering you, I might say, the relentless opportunities to live the very meaning of life, as John Paul II summarized it in that great encyclical, The Gospel of Life, to give one's life for the other, like Jesus. But it's a sign of the times, and it happens to be my area of scholarship, that the family is struggling. That whole marriage and family experience is less often chosen and less often persisted in. In our country, a lot of people see marriage not as a place where the very meaning of life is learned for the vast majority, but rather as a lifestyle choice for finding emotional love and companionship, for sharing enjoyment with people who seem to enjoy the same things you do. There's a couple of economists from the University of Pennsylvania who have this really depressing paper in which they argue that modern marriage can be classified as hedonic exchange, that is, the exchange of pleasures. It's a place where people consume pleasurable things, but it's way more fun to do it together than alone. Things like movies, children, or meals. Today, many envision marriage as a kind of luxury good, to be enjoyed after filling up some imaginary cup of necessary desires or desserts that every individual, it's thought, should have before settling down to joint consumption, that is. Thus, we see today less marriage, later marriage, fewer kids. We see a lot of divorce and divorce-related squabbles. I teach family law. My students are shocked that more than 50% of all litigation, non-criminal litigation in the US, has to do with domestic problems. We see lots of cohabitation too, right? I think it's 54% of all people cohabit before marriage now. Studies show clearly, though, that it's getting shorter, and it's among the top threats to a lasting marriage, second only after marrying super young. It's also accompanied by very, very little actual sharing of money or other goods. It experiences really high rates of infidelity and drastically more violence than marriage. In other words, in the family realm, we see a lot of delaying or even denying permanently, inviting someone else to come into the little center of the universe where one person is living. But given that most people are destined for the marital vocation at some point in their lives, given that Scripture tells us that marriage is linked with coming to glimpse what God's love is like, this is a big problem for marriage and for the Christian life. Indeed, if you take seriously not only the teaching of Scripture, with its use from beginning to end, to the last part of it, of marital images for God's relationship with human beings, if you take seriously the teachings of John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis, that there's a relationship between doing and loving marriage and understanding the nature of the Trinity, God's way of loving us, and how we love other people, you can see why our last several popes have really devoted an extraordinary amount of attention to the family. It's a theme of the times for decades and decades now. But it's not a slam dunk that learning to love people in the family is going to happen. And if we can't accomplish it that easily with people who we're actually kind of biologically destined or inclined to love, think about how hard it can be to learn to love the neighbors that we see along the way. Way prior to the invention of the Peanuts cartoon with Charlie Brown, Theodore Dostoevsky was writing. And you may remember the character of Father Zosima in that fabulous book, The Brothers Karamazov. There, Father Zosima is talking to a woman who's confessing to him that she has this tremendous problem wanting to do good things just so other people will see them. And here's what Father Zosima says. In 24 hours, I can begin to hate even the best of men. One because he takes too long eating his dinner. Another because he has a cold and he keeps blowing his nose. I become the enemy of people the moment they touch me. On the other hand, it's always happened that the more I hate people individually, the more ardent become my love for humanity. He sums it up with that very famous quote I'm sure you've heard later when he says, "Love in dreams thirsts for immediate action, quickly performed and with everyone watching. Indeed, it will go so far as the giving of one's life, provided it doesn't take too long, but is soon over, as on stage when everyone is looking on and praising. Whereas active love of the other is labor and perseverance. And for some people, maybe a whole science. And I'm sure you've experienced this in your life. I know I have. I recall a couple of situations where I was, serving food to the homeless at a soup kitchen in DC, right? Okay, sure, good for me. I'm standing next to my daughter and her other 17-year-old friend while I'm doing this, and one of the guys coming in line, and we're putting food on his plate, and he makes this incredibly offensive sexual comment about the girls. I'm thinking, really? Then there's a prisoner I represented pro bono, for free that is, in a federal court, and managed to get a pretty flimsy cause of action through an entire jury trial, only for him to turn around and sue me after he lost when I advised him that his case hardly even merited a trial, let alone an appeal, and he was certainly going to lose. So it's not only that we will not get the immediate gratification we want from loving others, there's also the fear associated with turning your life over to God in service. There's the fear of what might God have in mind if we actually shut up long enough to listen to him. What might he have in mind in the way of time, money, or even where we'll end up living? For me, for example, I can tell you that when I was your age, I wanted to be a lawyer. Okay, I am that. But I had this image of myself in some very cool red suit with a car to match, a pretty nice briefcase, and a pretty cool job at a firm. And yet, 4 years after I got started down that track, I found myself in an efficiency apartment with rats, on Capitol Hill, working for 60% less than my law firm job for the church. I was really happy, right? But ask me at your age whether I thought that would be cool, rats included. No, I don't think so. There's also the fear that we'll never get to do the host of cool stuff that we wanted to try if we start down this path of serving others. Maybe, too, there's this big existential, about the notion that life is nothing more than first being cared for until you're more or less independent, only to be asked to turn around real quickly and take all your sports trophies, all your honor societies, all your good grades, all the promise that your teachers and your darling grandmother saw in you, and fork it over to some other people. People you don't even know. People who happen to be lying in your path on that proverbial road from Jerusalem to Jericho, or wherever you find yourself. Pope Benedict asked this question rhetorically in the middle of his first encyclical, which I do adore. I really recommend you read Deus Caritas Est. It's a great read. It truly is. I'm not just saying that because I'm a nerd. It actually is. Of course, Pope Benedict puts it much more elegantly than I just did, but in the section of his encyclical entitled Love of God and Love of Neighbor, he asks, can we really respond to love of God with love of neighbor? Every neighbor, really? He answers, yes, but only if we come to understand that love is not a feeling, it's an act of will, it requires purification and maturation. Maturation involving opening yourself up to the fact that God is actually more present to you than you can be to yourself. At that point, he says, love of neighbor is possible the way the Bible exhorts you to do it. At that point, he says, quote, I can give to others much more than their outward necessities. I can give them that look of love which they crave. And of course, Francis has zeroed in on this in Words and Action in his papacy. He calls us to be church as a field hospital, on the same field where the wounded are battling. He tells pastors to go out to the peripheries and to come back smelling like their sheep. He makes calls to widows who've lost their only sons. He delivers personal checks to people who can't afford the utility bills. In the New Year's address he gave a few days ago, he urges us to undertake an examination of conscience so that we learn to defend the poor rather than defending ourselves from them, to defend the weak rather than defending ourselves from them. You can really avoid chasing the almighty dollar if you enter a career with a service mentality. You'll find you have more courage because you are empowered by being entrusted with others' welfare. Hi, Archbishop so-and-so, this is Helen Alvare. I need to meet with you. A service orientation, when you have a goal to accomplish, has a way of opening your mind to other people's gifts.